I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Back from the Grave edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. It's been such a long time. The last time we talked was October. That's right, I took an extended sabbatical, pretty much the last quarter of 2018. Lots and lots of interesting stuff sort of floating around relating to that. I hinted at it a little bit in some shows leading up to the break. It's just interesting the kind of stuff life throws in front of you, right? And I'm always one for exploring options, so I didn't want to dismiss out of hand some of the things that were coming my way. A lot of them had nothing to do with real estate. I had a couple of very interesting offers to rejoin the corporate world at a level that would really let me have an influence on those organizations. Now, I actually, for the couple of conversations I actually had to sign non-disclosure agreements, so I'm not at liberty to discuss those things. But man, it was an interesting time. I also, out of the blue, got an interesting offer from someone to do a two-man podcast of another kind, totally not real estate. So it's been interesting, and it was fun to talk about those things and see what other people's take on other things is. I think it's always great when you get some sort of an opportunity to at least hear it out to the end of the process, right? Don't dismiss it out of hat. Maybe at some point, if it's appropriate, I can talk more about some of that stuff. I'm not sure it'd be horribly interesting for a real estate crowd, but it was interesting for me. It was great to go through, and it was kind of interesting to sort of reacquaint myself with that part of the world, you know, the more corporate thing. But anyway, okay, so I'm back. My intent was really never to disappear entirely, and I know it felt like I had. I got some messages from a few folks over the course of the last 3 months. Thank you for reaching out. As always, I appreciate the folks who take the time not only to listen to the show, but then actually seem to take a personal interest in what's going on with me. That is appreciated. But I wanted to take a little time and evaluate these other things. But I had always intended, real estate's always going to be a part of my life. I dig real estate. I like it. I like a lot of different things about it. So it's never going to be something that goes away entirely. But there was a serious question as to whether or not I could sort of pursue some interests at the level I would need to and continue to do the show and be able to continue to do the show just because of the limited number of hours in a day. So I am back in the saddle. I'm not, unlike past years where I've overpromised and underdelivered on some of the things relating to the show. For now on, what I'm going to say is the show is still here. It is going to continue through 2019. This will be today. Today is the 7th. So this is the actual 12-year anniversary of the show. The first show was January 7th of 2007. It's had a number of different iterations over the years. And I know there's at least 2 of you that have been listening to the show since then. And which is saying something, because I think when I first was hosting it, I was hosting it just on my website. There really weren't a lot of, or at least I wasn't exploring other venues. I don't think it may have been up on iTunes. I can't even remember. I can't imagine how else people would have found it. But anyway, super happy to still be here. I'm not saying goodbye to it. What I will commit to is we'll at least see one show a week with possibly others. I would kind of love to get into a groove where I could get back into doing 3 shows a week. And heck, you know what? I actually would love to get back into doing 5 shows a week, but I'm just not sure time is going to allow. So where are we at? And all during this time, I've continued my regular daily routine of reviewing news and whatnot. So I have all of this stuff. I actually have to delete a lot of it because it's no longer relevant. But so all the things that I do on a daily basis that have fed the show have continued going on with my life in terms of news that I come across, those kinds of things, because I'm using them. A lot of what we talk about here on the show and have in the past are the same kind of conversations I have with folks face to face, right? Whether I'm doing a listing appointment or I'm taking a buyer to look at a property and we're talking about the market and figuring out smart ways to go. I'm using the information that I share with you here and other information to help inform them as best I can on where the market is. And that's a really good question. Where is the market right now? We've talked a lot about different elements of the market, what things are looking good, what things are looking bad, things that should scare us. For those of you who aren't really up on that, I guess it probably would be a good idea to do another show that reviews all of the things that have concerned me and encouraged me. Now, one thing that's new for those of you who are folks who've listened to the show for a while, and for those of you who haven't, if you want to go back and listen to some shows from the past, you can just go to therebelbroker.com and you should be able to get access to all of them. At the very least, there's a link there, I think, to my archive over on Libsyn, so you can also find it there. But there's usually notes associated with it that'll give you an idea of what each show is about. But I try not to be too cryptic. I try to make it real clear what's contained in each show. So there are definitely shows over the past year, 2 years that talk about the goofy things that are being done in order to really recreate what I think is a bad situation. As we stand here today, the stock market has taken a huge dive, and there's a lot of folks freaking out. Apple has had some troubles, and Apple tends to be a big leader, and when bad things happen to Apple, the market tends to also assume bad things are happening. We've got lots of pundits out there saying a lot of different things relating to what this is a sign of. And from a standpoint of real estate, what do we care about, right? Now, granted, I'm not avoiding other topics because they don't matter. Absolutely, they matter. Unemployment things matter. And that's another interesting dichotomy here is even though the unemployment numbers recently went up a little bit, it's because the participation rate went up. We have more people employed now than we did last time we got numbers, but the unemployment number actually went up a little bit just because there's more people participating, which actually I think is a good thing. So we're from an employment standpoint, we're not doing badly. And as I've said before, one of the cornerstones, one of the foundations of a healthy real estate market is good employment, right? In order for you to buy a home, you need to have a job, or you damn well better have a job, because it's not doing you any favors by allowing you to borrow a ton of money on a home if you don't have the means to make the payments. We're not doing you a favor. Now, on that subject, I did have one article that just came through. This is from National Real Estate Investor, and it follows right along with some of the scary junk that we've talked about before. And the headline is Empowering Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae to Solve the Affordable Housing Crisis. Well, that, for anyone who knows what Fannie and Freddie do, that should scare the crap out of you. Because Freddie and Fannie, the only thing they do is dip their feet, big stinky hairy feet, into the lending world. So that means that if you're going to, quote unquote, empower Freddie and Fannie to solve, quote unquote, the affordable housing crisis, that doesn't mean you're not doing things that actually affect the cost of homes. What you're doing is affecting the ability of subprime borrowers to get cash to buy those homes. And that should sound familiar. And it should sound familiar because that's what screwed us up last time. And here's the little blurb that comes with this article. It just blows my mind. Availability of capital drives the creation and sustainment of rental housing, but driving significant dollars into affordable housing generally requires some element of government support or incentive. All of that should scare the crap out of you. There's not a single word in that run-on sentence that shouldn't scare the crap out of you. Everything in there reeks of government-backed subprime loans to people who normally wouldn't qualify, to try to bridge the gap between what people can afford and what's currently available for sale. The article goes on to state, a solution to the affordable housing crisis in the United States continues to evade disparate groups battling this growing problem. Whether it's chronic homelessness or workforce housing, the core elements begin with a supply and demand imbalance impacted by capital availability and negative social perception of low-income rental housing. Over 35% of Americans live in rental housing, and that percentage continues to grow. Interesting things we can note about that as well. According to Freddie Mac, nearly 30% of renters, that's more than 11 million households, spend at least 50% of their income on housing. Affordable rental housing is key in the effort to solve this crisis. And Freddie and Fannie, commonly referred to as the GSEs, that translates to government-sponsored entities. And remember, let's all remind ourselves what that means. If you're a government-sponsored entity, that means if you completely screw up and you cause lots and lots of money to get spent, you, the taxpayer, are on the hook for it. You might remember TARP. Anyone remember TARP? If you've ever heard of them referring to quantitative easing, well, all of those billions that ended up racking up to trillions of dollars of money the government had to print and spend, which causes inflation as well, which is another thing we've talked about in the past. That's where it went. It went to paying off stupid crap these guys did. Now, Fannie and Freddie are at the soft, chewy center of dumb lending. If we go back to everything relating to subprime borrowing, right? Whether you want to talk about the securitization of those loans, which was absolutely sponsored by these two entities, and plus some banks and also some really stupid members of Congress. Every element of this is dumb, and they're doing it again. Okay. And then it gets into the part where most people don't read, right? Most people read that blurb, they read the first paragraph, and then they're done. Well, if you read on, it says, availability of capital drives the creation and sustainment of rental housing, but driving significant dollars into affordable housing generally requires some element of government support or incentive, which is actually just from the blurb. The most prolific suppliers of capital in the affordable rental market, Freddie and Fannie, deliver capital through mortgage programs that have come at no net cost to the U.S. taxpayer for over 2 decades. Okay, that really requires some myopic thinking in order to say no net cost to the U.S. taxpayer. Because subprime lending, which is what these folks pushed, absolutely is what built up the downturn. It's absolutely what artificially supported the insane increase in home prices from 2000 to 2007. If not for their lending policies, I would argue that would not have happened. You simply would not have had enough buyers. You wouldn't have artificially created a gigantic number of buyers through subprime lending, which then through more buyers than there was supply, a dramatic increase in the cost of homes. So maybe if on a accounting sheet, you can say that, well, we wrote this mortgage and these are the payments we got back. Maybe you can ultimately say that they didn't cost the taxpayers any money. But when you realize how much the downturn costs us and the role that these organizations played in that downturn, I think it is and whether it's just not looking enough at it, although, hey, I'm just a guy out here reading articles, so you'd think they'd realize it. This is the most myopic approach to this problem I've ever seen. Okay. Even in the midst of the Great Recession, the multifamily divisions of Freddie and Fannie were profitable. Not always. Ultimately, they ended up being. Remember all those auctions that went off for all those properties and all the bailouts that got paid? And I'm wondering if they're counting the bailouts that were written for a lot of these banks that had underwritten loans that ended up going to Fannie and Freddie. Since the end of the Great Recession, Fannie and Freddie have, on a cumulative basis, provided a total dividends of $279.7 billion to the U.S. Treasury, compared to the approximate $180 billion provided from the U.S. Treasury. If these agencies had been allowed to retain these profits, the risk to taxpayers would have been effectively eliminated. Again, unless you factor in the economic situation that the policies of Fannie and Freddie brought in. So there's that. All right, so you can check that article out for yourself. As I mentioned, it's at National Real Estate Investor. It came out on January 4th. The title is Empowering Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae to Solve the Affordable Housing Crisis. Now, how do we really solve the affordable housing crisis? Now, one argument I've made is roll back all the stupid stuff that's been put in place by governments since the year 2000. Whether you want to talk about as it relates to home construction, whether you want to talk about regulations or additional taxes. Now, remember, something we've talked about before, Tons of new taxes got rolled out from 2000 to 2007 because the government was watching this big balloon of a real estate industry happen. And we're like, well, we're not getting a piece of that pie, or at least we're not getting enough of a piece of that pie. So there are areas within California, for instance, where if you're a developer and you're building a home, for every home you build, you get a bill for $100,000 from the tax man. That's not to cover streets. That's not to cover sewers. You're paying all that stuff already. Those were already existed. But you just have this premium that you have to pay. And of course, that gets passed on to the buyer. There's no builder that's simply going to say, well, you know what? I'm going to be willing to lose $100,000 because of this tax. It's absolutely passed on to the consumer, which is you and me. So if you just rolled everything back to 2000, and I can't think of anyone who believes that their homes are significantly safer today if they were built in 2017 or 18 or 19 than they were in 2000. And the amount of money that would be saved would be ridiculous. If you find a chart on Google, go ahead and do a search for it and look at the regulations or the costs relating to different regulations and taxation on builders. You want to talk about a hockey stick graph, that's what that graph is. You go from 2000 and the amount of money that's being paid just goes up ridiculously. In some estimates I've seen, if you were to roll back regulations to the 2000 time frame, you'd see a 30 to 35% reduction in costs of building, which even if you don't get all of it, let's say some builders decide to absolutely pocket every freaking dime of that they can, or at least as much of it as they can, simply to remain competitive, you're going to see probably at least a 25% to 30% reduction in what you pay as a buyer. Wouldn't that be nice? I think it would. All right, so let's take a look at some ground truth. As I've mentioned in past shows, I like to stay plugged in with an awful lot of different folks, whether it's new home builders or lenders, those kinds of people, to see what they're pushing. What are they pushing out to people? So here, instead of taking some high 10,000 foot view of what's happening with lending, let me just share with you an interesting email that I got from someone at, what is this from? The Van Patten Mortgage Group. And this one's going to blow your mind because we're not even going to talk about low down or any of this kind of stuff. We're going to talk about down payment assistance. Down payment assistance is available for amounts up to $750,000 with a maximum income of $228,300. Don't let the lack of a down payment stop your buyers from purchasing. Our down payment assistance covers all down payment and closing costs. Other available products, FHA minimum FICO 540. Now, one of the things we've talked about here on the show is how FICO scores have been artificially increased by the way that they've tweaked them so that they count things that were never counted before as positives and have completely ignored medical judgments and other types of things that should negatively affect your credit. VA no minimum FICO, FHA and VA construction with a minimal down, including lot purchases, fix and flip, including rehab, ITIN borrowers, non-permanent residents, foreign nationals. These folks are pushing you into a loan where they'll even help with the down payment. If that doesn't reek of the kind of stuff we saw in the subprime lending period before the big meltdown, I don't know what does. All right. Now, as we move through the week, probably the next show I'm going to do is going to be a state of the market. Now, for those of you who aren't aware or didn't pay attention at the entry to the show, I'm in California. I am in Silicon Valley, California. And that means the data that I can collect stretches pretty much from San Francisco down to Monterey. And I usually go by county. Santa Clara County is my primary county. That's also where Silicon Valley is. And usually when I'm sharing really specific data, that's where those numbers come from. So what I'm going to be doing in a future show, probably the next show, maybe even the show for this Friday, or if I have time this Wednesday, that next show will be, let's look at what the market is actually doing right now, right here. We are still in a place where in many areas, now don't get me wrong, we talked about this way back in October and September, that there's definitely a pivot that's happened. We've seen inventory go up. We've seen sales numbers go down. But in many areas, we're still continuing to see increases in sales price. And so the slowdown that most of these headlines are referring to are not actual decreases in asking prices or sales prices. It's decreases in the rate at which those numbers are increasing. And I'm even able to see that in some areas, it's not decreasing. There are some areas, and of course that makes sense when you look at different price ranges. Now, luxury markets have absolutely been hit, but if you exclude luxury market ranges from your numbers, you find flat or even increasing prices. Now, as an example, the way I like to approach the market anecdotally is I like to pretend like I'm a buyer. Let's pretend I'm a buyer and I want a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home or greater, and I don't want to spend more than, say, $800,000 in Silicon Valley or in Santa Clara County. What I do is I run that search every week. And I get on my little map on Trulia. I do this on Trulia because I figure that's where a lot of people will do it, or Zillow, wherever I'm in the mood to go, typically Trulia. And I look to see where are the dots, where are the homes showing up on the map that fit the criteria. And the reason why I take that really high level view is because I can see where the dots are and where they're shrinking from, right? So a month ago, I was able to see dots of that kind all the way down through South San Jose and even creeping over towards Los Gatos along the 85. Well, not so much anymore. Now the homes that meet that criteria tend to be downtown, north of the 85 freeway, or on the east side of San Jose. So tending to huddle in the less desirable areas of the city. So and I've been seeing that all along, right? Now it does vary a little bit. It does fluctuate from time to time. And we are in that period of time where you're expecting to see slightly less listings, but still, it's a trend that's interesting and something you can use, by the way, in your areas to try to get an idea of where the fluctuation of prices is happening in a more general way in terms of getting data on what's happening with inventory right now. Now, an interesting thing to note is I am not seeing that in the rental market. It appears as though what you can, at least in this marketplace, it appears that what you can get for your rental property has remained relatively flat. It fluctuated a little bit. It actually went down a little bit over the last couple of months. And now it's sort of stabilized back in the normal range. But when I do a search on a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, and I usually will put in there like $3,500 or $3,600 a month, I still continue to see about the same number of homes available in the same areas. I'm not seeing a shrinking. I'm not seeing a migration of those away from various areas. And of course, there is no home like that available anywhere north of, say, Cupertino along the peninsula in my market, simply because stuff's just way too expensive up there. As soon as you start getting really, if you get towards the water side, as you get closer to San Francisco, you can find some up there. But again, I'm not seeing trends. The trend I'm seeing, though, on homes for sale is a contraction. I'm not seeing as many homes that are considered, quote unquote, more affordable or that fall under the average price to be in as wide an area as they were before. So that tells me that in that particular pricing market, we're continuing to see relative increases in prices and still a lot of demand for those homes. And the days on market is still relatively low. So we'll do a survey of that. We'll get an idea of where things really are, calibrate you to what the real numbers are, because I think that out in the world, we're getting some very interesting headlines that don't really tell us much. Now, if you look at the data for places like San Diego and Phoenix and a lot of these other cities that we've always sort of paid attention to, we'll also see there that we are, in some of those markets, we are seeing that third element that I think really is the defining factor you should be looking for. So what are those? Factor number 1 is inventory increasing, right? Factor number 2 are sales decreasing. If those two things are happening, that's kind of interesting. But the real interesting thing is what's happening with the average price. So once you get a market where inventory is increasing, sales are decreasing, and price is down from previous months, that's when things get interesting. And that shows you that you might be heading into a pivot. And there's an awful lot of folks who think that's going to happen. And if you've been paying attention to the headlines, a lot of it relates to news that's happening right now. And I mean right now. You have folks out there who are, and with all of the stuff relating to the stock market and how this quote unquote recovery we've been in since 2008 really hasn't been a recovery. It's really been because we've printed so much money. That's why there's all these trillions of dollars of debt, because we've printed too much money. And another thing that happened on Thursday was the 2-year, 5-year, not the 10-year, because that's a slightly different animal, but the 1-year, 2-year, and 5-year, I think, all of those treasury notes fell below the prime lending rate, which is 2.4%. So that's a bad thing. And the last time that happened was 2008. So we've had prime rate discussions before as it relates to mortgage rates, and they don't. It's the 10-year Treasury that relates more to the mortgage rate. But the prime lending rate obviously is an important number on its own, regardless of that. And one thing that is a red light is when those flavors of Treasury fall below what the prime lending rate is. So that's a bad thing. And that has a lot of people worried. And what I'm reading from folks who pay more attention to the business end, to large businesses, the concern is that you're going to see a big drop in employment. You're going to see folks getting laid off. You're going to see larger companies contracting, holding on to more of their cash and preparing for a downturn. And here's the thing. When people start to believe a downturn is going to happen, it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. What you end up with is companies that think they see the writing on the wall, so they start doing things to prepare for it, and the things they're doing to prepare for it cause it. So you might see reorganizations, restructuring, layoffs, those types of things happening. The car industry is seeing double-digit drops in sales, which is kind of blowing a lot of folks away. That's a big concern. All of those things could feed a downturn in employment that could then feed a bad real estate thing. All right. So we'll see where those go. Those are things I'm going to keep my eyes on. And as I mentioned in a future show, just coming up sometime this week, we're going to go ahead and do what the market's doing. But like we do every year, there's other stuff I want to cover. Going to have a lot of different folks who are going to tell us what to expect in 2019. I think those are all good things to look at. But this time of year is also a great time to look back and see, where are people leaving the most and where are people going to the most. So don't go away. We'll be right back. And when we do come back, we're going to talk about the top states people are leaving versus the top states people are heading to. Super interesting, and also fits in really neatly with stuff we've already discussed on past shows. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right. Aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back, everyone. Boy, is it time for me to get a new ad. That is getting a little bit long in the tooth. Going to have to work on that. Another thing for the to-do list. As I promised, next on our hit list, the top 5 states people are fleeing and then where they're moving to. We're going to have some interesting appearances on this list. We've done this list every year, I think, for the past, God, I don't know, 10 years? Could it be 10? We've done it a lot. It's always interesting. I think it always points out potential opportunities. And again, this one's from United Van Lines. And I think I love these kinds of sources, right? Because this is, I'm renting a truck and I am moving myself out of here. So I think that's always an interesting place to start. Now, I'll go ahead and see if I can't include a link to the United Van Lines page. You can do it state by state. It's kind of awesome. And they've got showings for high inbound, balanced, medium outbound, high outbound. What's interesting is California is not on the high outbound list this year. California is on the balanced this year. I'm not sure that's true if you go by region. Just to give you more anecdotal experience, I closed several deals during the time while I was gone. I actually just closed 2 deals over the last 5 days. This has been one of the more busy winters I've had. I usually take winters off. Like I did with this sabbatical thing, my intent was I'm out. right? I'm going to go have some fun. And I ended up having to do an awful lot of stuff because this was a very odd winter. What ended up happening is, including the folks who are going to be selling in the first quarter of this year, everybody's leaving the state. Again, this is a topic we've talked about before. I talked about this a year ago. We've got some very interesting trends in terms of we have a nearly 50% rate of folks who say they want to move out of California. This is a survey from the Silicon Valley area where things are absolutely insane. And that's, I can't remember when it's ever been like that. I do not recall a time where that many people said they wanted to leave the Bay Area. I mean, I can remember it peaking at like 20% at some point in the 90s, but that was about it. But you mix that with the other weird stuff that is happening with California government in terms of things they're telling corporations they can and cannot do. They're interfering more and more with corporate organizations. You got to think, and so given those two things, plus the idea that they could locate to places that are way cheaper, you have to start thinking local corporations in California, or folks that might have gone ahead and incorporated in California, will choose a different state simply because of the costs involved. So let's go ahead and hit this list. I think it's interesting. Now, here are the states that saw the greatest population decreases. So to look at that from the other way, the highest number of people leaving the state. Number one on our list, and this state has been on the list many times in the past. For my money, I totally get why people want to leave this state. And even if you think it's a most wonderful state in terms of weather and what it has to offer, just the taxes in this state make it absolutely worth considering leaving. That's New Jersey. 66.8% of all moves in New Jersey resulted in residents leaving the state. While the author of this thinks New Jersey is just wonderful, it has the highest property taxes in the entire country. It's also the most densely populated state. Even with high taxes, this is New Jersey's first year as the number one state for people to leave. That is not true. New Jersey was number one on our list 3 years ago. I believe not from United Van Lines, but from a different moving company. Was it U-Haul? Maybe? I can't remember. But I know New Jersey was number one because then I did a follow-up show on all the crazy crap that goes on in New Jersey. So according to this, for the past 10 years, United Van Lines has listed it at number 10, 34.73% of people leaving the state told United Van Lines that they did so for a job. So maybe that's true for United Van Lines, but with other carriers, New Jersey's absolutely been. In fact, the year that I had clients was this last year or the year before. So it was either 2000. It wasn't 2018. It was probably 2017. I had sellers who were going to be moving to New Jersey. And the numbers came out literally the week we went into escrow on their house here, and I shared it with them, and we had a laugh about it. And I said, well, you're going to the state where everyone's leaving. And they said, well, great, then our house will be cheap. And they ended up getting a fantastic deal on a house in New Jersey. But anyway, so there you go. I don't know where I was going with that. Number 2, Illinois. When people in Illinois move, 65.9% of the time they move outside the state, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. After New York, Illinois had the greatest net loss of citizens between 2017 and 2018. Let's see. And, given what's going on in Chicago, and you got to think that the metropolitan areas are really at the core of this, it's not a hard one to figure out. Chicago is just dying on the vine and really needs a reset of some kind. Number 3, Connecticut. While nearby Vermont may have seen the highest percentage of people moving in, Connecticut had more in common here with neighboring New Jersey and New York. 62% of all moves in the state for 2018 were former residents leaving. And let's see, number 4, New York. 61.5% of all moves in New York resulted in residents leaving the state, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. Another interesting thing we can tie in to stuff going on in New York, there was an article that came out talking about how now the average price in Manhattan, right? So that tends to be that's the island, right? Under $1 million is the average price. Before you buy into that, though, and I'm not arguing that the average price in Manhattan isn't going down. I'm sure it probably is. There's a lot of stuff going on in New York that is encouraging people to leave. However, if you go ahead and go on to Trulia or Zillow and just go down to Manhattan and do a search on properties, and you're going to see prices ranging from a studio for $500,000 to crazy properties that are $10 million, $60 million. And you know where that line is in New York? It tends to be once you have more bathrooms than bedrooms, suddenly things go nuts in what you're expected to pay for places in New York. And you know what? That tends to be true here too. I've never understood that dynamic. I guess maybe it's a world where every bedroom has its own bathroom, and then so no one is sharing. And maybe, and what's really funny, I've seen two bathroom, I want to say this correctly. One of the more luxurious homes I did, and I'll be honest, I don't think I've listed a luxury home in over a year, maybe a year and a half. But the last couple, but I had a weird sprint of them all at once. I had like 5 or 6 in a row. And what's interesting is you can have a home like that where one bedroom has 2 bathrooms, right? The master suite will oftentimes in some super luxury homes have 2 bathrooms, 2 full bathrooms, one on each side of the master suite. One is a his and one is a hers. So I guess that's how that happens. Or as an owner, you never want to urinate in the same place twice in one day. That would be like a goal, right? Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that. That was harsh. Okay, out of the 9 states the Census Bureau identified as having lost population during that time period, New York lost the most people. So that was New York as number 4. Number 5, Kansas. Why the hell would Kansas be on that? I know nothing about Kansas. Kansas might not seem like it has too much in common with the other states on this list, but it still lost one of the highest percentages of movers last year. 58.7% of people who used United Van Lines in Kansas in 2018 were leaving the state. Why would that be? You know, I would love to be able to offer some wisdom here, but why would that be? Kansas seems like a nice place, but you know what? I can't remember. I seem to recall there was one city. Maybe one like 2 years ago. That was one on our list of cities that's good to invest in with good rate of return. Maybe I have a listener who's an investor in Kansas. I'd love for you to tell me what are some areas in Kansas that are awesome, and tell me why you're losing so many people and how you made this list to be so high on this list. Now we're going to go ahead and move over to states that saw the greatest influx of people. And as we alluded to earlier, number 1 on that list is Vermont. Vermont currently has the lowest population of any state except Wyoming. I like Wyoming. Someone once told me that people go insane in Wyoming because the wind only blows from one direction. That seems odd, that's what would drive you nuts. But if last year's trends continue, it may not hold that place for long. 72.6% of all people who moved to a new home in Vermont in 2018 came from out of state. That's pretty phenomenal. Now, just to sort of calibrate you to what I'm seeing, and again, my sample's ridiculously small because these are just the folks I've represented. So who knows what kind of weird bias might be built into who ends up being helped by me, right? But over the last year, and I've talked about this before, I would say between 75 and 80% of the people I have helped sell a home are moving out of the state. And happily, gleefully, and for like, we don't like it here anymore reasons, not like family is elsewhere. It's been very enthusiastic. I'm not into this anymore kind of reasons. Used to be the other way around, right? It used to be 25% of folks who I helped move were moving out of the state because they didn't want to, or just, and even then, if you'd have to chop it up even more because even of that 25%, many of them weren't leaving because they had a problem with California. In fact, this whole I have a problem with California thing is really relatively new. I don't think I had many people get too cranky about what was going on in California till early 2000s, maybe is when I first started to hear it. Cost of living, I guess if you include cost of living in that would broaden it back maybe from the beginning of when I first got into this. But it definitely, I've seen a reversal in terms of the percentages of folks who are leaving the state. Which is a concern because now there's lots of other reasons that make it easier and more profitable for that to be a thing that companies leverage off of. Okay, what's next? Who is number 2? We've got Oregon. I love Oregon. Oregon's going a little bit nuts. Portland is like a weird Santa Cruz, Berkeley kind of place. 63.8% of people who moved. Okay, they've screwed up. That's bizarre. So according to this article, 63% of people who moved in Idaho came from out of state. And we're not talking about Idaho, we're talking about Oregon. That's nearly 9 full percentage points behind Vermont, but it still beat out all 48 other states. So it may be they just mixed up Oregon and Idaho. Now, I was hoping to lead up more in a more sexy way to the whole Idaho thing, because remember who's been telling you about Idaho? That would be me. I have been talking about Idaho now for at least a year. I think it's more like a year and a half. This time last year, I was marketing a home for a couple that was going to move to Idaho. They were going to Coeur d'Alene. A couple of months before that, I was marketing a home for an engineer who was moving to Boise, Idaho, where he said there were tons of high-tech jobs available. So Idaho has sort of become this interesting place. If you're moving to northern Idaho, odds are you're retiring. If you're moving to southern Idaho or the Boise area, odds are you're a millennial or you're a middle younger person who's still in the workforce, who might be looking for that new job, that first job in high tech or whatever else. And you're finding plenty of opportunities there. So that's kind of interesting. All right. According to this, and I'm wondering if they swapped these out, 62.4, I think they just used the wrong word previously. I think they said Idaho when they meant Oregon. So 63.8% of people who moved in Oregon came from out of state. So I think because then the next one that seems correct. 62.4% of all people who moved to a new home in this state, Idaho, in the past year are moving from out of state, whether it's the scenic views or the famous potatoes. People seem to like Idaho. Idaho had the second highest population growth by percentage in the country between July 1st, 2017 and July 1st, 2018, according to United Van Lines. Most of the people who used their services to move to this state did so because they wanted a change of lifestyle. Now, what's interesting is notice this data just goes up to July 1st of 2018. It's going to be super interesting to get data from other moving companies that might give us data that goes right up to end of December 2018, because I think we're going to see these could potentially shift. I wouldn't be surprised if I saw Idaho go higher on this list, given the number of people that I've helped move there. Next on the list, Nevada, and this one kind of blows me away a little bit. Just barely behind Idaho, Nevada saw 61.8% of all moves in Nevada were people from outside the state moving in. Nevada also beat out Utah as the state with the highest population growth by percentage between 2017 and 2018. Next on the list, totally doesn't surprise me, just surprises me that it came in after Nevada, and actually maybe even after Idaho. I have interesting things in my back of my head about this state, and that's Arizona. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the population of Arizona grew by 122,770 between 2017 and 2018. 60.2% of all moves in Arizona during the past year were people moving in from out of state. That should not surprise freaking anybody. Now, Arizona's number 5 on this list. I'm kind of surprised it's not higher. Phoenix is a huge draw from the standpoint of places where I continue to see really good opportunities for investment of all types. Phoenix and the greater Phoenix area still represents amazing opportunities. Every time I go in there and I poke around with the numbers, or if I'm reading an article about some Arizona city, I will quickly discover that it's a suburb of Phoenix, right? It's just a little bit to the south or a little bit to the north or borders Phoenix. We find that all the time. I've done review of articles in the past where we've talked about that dynamic, where when we talk about these top 4 places that appeared in Arizona as great return on investment cities, we discover they border each other right next to Phoenix. So, and I think Phoenix still continues to be that. And I am one of those people who continues to monitor what's going on with Phoenix real estate, particularly in terms of what are we seeing in terms of inventory, what are we seeing in terms of sales, and are prices actually going down in Phoenix? So when you share your enthusiasm, let's say you're not a Phoenix fan, right? For whatever reason. Now, I've got several cities I like. I like Chattanooga. I like Phoenix and its outlying areas. I like some cities I've never been, simply because we've had interviews here on the show where those were it sounded like great places to invest. Charlotte, North Carolina is one. Atlanta, Georgia is another. And I've talked to some people who just swear by Dallas, and I'm not a huge fan. I've been in Dallas a few times, and I just don't like sweating that much. But if I don't live there and I just have investment properties there, that's fine. But if you want to get a feel, right? And I suggest you do it. There's no cost to you other than a few minutes. Run up to a Trulia or a Zillow, type in the name of the city, Phoenix in this case, and you'll be presented with an opportunity. There'll be at the top a menu item that says local info, and select market trends. And just get a really quick view of what's going on. And you can look at all properties. You could look at just 1 bedrooms or 2, 3, or 4 bedrooms and get an idea of the median sales prices in Phoenix. You can look at the last year. You can look at the last 5 years. You can look back as far as they go, which is all the way to the year 2000. So it gives you a lot of cool information right there at your fingertips. And if you go and you look at that, you'll see that right now, the average price for all properties, and let's say you want to do 3-bed. I mean, I tend to do 3-bed simply because, that's the sweet spot for me. In some communities, you can't do that. You can only do it for all properties. Phoenix looks like right now that's the way you have to do it. But if you look at just all prices, right now, the average sales price is $239. About a year ago, it was $225, right? So a fairly decent increase. I believe it was a 7% is what they touted here. Yeah, 7.2% year over year increase in Phoenix. What's interesting is median rent is something you can kind of figure out. It looks like rents took a little bit of a dive in October. They were at $14.95 in September and went down to $14.50 in October. If we look at the number of rentals, they've seen a pretty good increase with a slight dip between September and October, the same time where we saw that dip in rents. If we look just at 3-bed, we see those have been pretty steady. Now, remember, whenever you're doing your research, you want to try to specify what you are working with. So what's interesting is if you overlay the all properties versus the 3-beds, you discover it kind of generally follows that trend line, but then it doesn't peak as high. It stops at $14.50 instead of $14.95 and remains entirely flat from May all the way until October. But overlay that with what's been happening in the last year on prices, and particularly if you go back to the beginning of the year, you see that rents really haven't been increasing as a percent. You can see that they're rising. Their trend has been the same, but the amount they haven't been increasing hasn't really been on par with a lot of these increases in prices. And that's less true here. It's less of a mathematically significant thing here, but you look at areas like my area where homes are millions of dollars. It makes it much more interesting when you try to make those calculations. And it also makes people understand why, despite all the hoopla about my market, it still comes in as the worst investment, the lowest return on investment. When you have to have millions of dollars invested in something just so you're positive cash flow, right? If you come in here and you do 20% down on a average home, which is about $1 million, so you're coming in with $200,000, you're not going to be positive cash flow on that house. You're just not. Rents simply have not kept up in a way that makes sense. So in order for you to get into the black, you have to put in more money, maybe double that, maybe 3 times that amount. So now suddenly you have $500,000, $600,000 invested in a property just to make it go positive cash flow for an amount that isn't really worth having that much money tied up, which is why my suggestion is always go to these areas like Phoenix where you can drop $50,000 10 times, right? If we're talking about $500,000, just go buy 10 homes where you only need to put down $50,000 and have more than 20% down when you do that. I mean, in most of these markets, $50,000 is going to be 25% down, and you're going to be positive cash flow, and you're going to be diversified. So meaning you could have 1 or 2 homes be vacant and you're still getting money from the other properties. That $1 million home in California, if that sucker's empty, you're getting $0 per month. So that's why when we review reports here on the greatest places to get return on investment, California doesn't tend to be at the top of that list. It tends to be at the very bottom, if not the worst. Okay, I got to tell you, a little saddle sore. I clearly have not been up on the horse in a while. I feel like we got some good information out there, though. I think there's great things just down the road for us. As I said, we are going to do let's see what the market is doing right now in my particular marketplace. And I believe it makes sense for me to do that as a video also. So for those of you who want to get access to videos that come from the show, I do put all of the shows to YouTube. They don't have video, they just have a static image, but we will do a show where it will have a video component to it, and you'll be able to see what I'm seeing. I'll be showing you the data that I'm presenting relating to what's going on with the markets. All right. Thanks again for listening, everybody. I truly appreciate you taking time to listen to what I have to say on these subjects. My goal, as always, is to leave you with more information, value than you've invested in terms of time. Hope we've achieved that today. Hope you have a great 2019, and I'm looking forward to helping you make it that way. Talk to y'all next time.